Steve Agar's One Mississippi, which is now the new contemporary state song for the state of Mississippi. I'm so happy for Steve. Welcome to Super Talk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the incredible outdoors of the state of Mississippi. I want to thank you for joining us on this powerful Super Talk Mississippi radio network, or on Super Talk TV at C Spire TV. But if you're listening on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast, it's April the 18th, 2022. I hope you had a great Christmas. Listen to me. Easter. I hope you had a great Easter weekend. I love Easter weekend, especially this year. A combination of a one-year birthday for my grandson Liam, and then church with family, and then Easter Day traditions. Among them, I might add, always frying speckled trout. It's sort of a wonderful weekend all together. I just love spending time with the family. My son Jordan and his friend Leland Dunning fished over the Pascagoula River this weekend, and they had a pretty good day. I mean, it was super windy. They spent some time over at Graveline Bayou, and he said, it was rough. They had to work hard. They got a few speckled trout. He said there were about 10 to 15 boats over there, and it was slow for all of them, best they could tell. But they were able to bring home some fish, and we were able to enjoy frying them yesterday. And it was just a great Easter day. We're actually still waiting on some weather to settle down so that we can get offshore. I checked the weather this morning. It looks like things this week are going to finally settle down just a little bit across the state. Let's hope so. I know that there are a lot of farmers who are working very hard to get their planting done. These regular occurrences of severe weather, it's been pretty tough. I'm really, really happy to be right here in the Foundation studio. And I can't thank you enough for listening. The feedback that we're getting for Super Talk Outdoors has been terrific, and I really appreciate that. Hey, listen, we're going to shift gears now. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I want to invite my friend Rick Dillard into the Super Talk Outdoors conversation. And first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him here shortly, but just say, how you doing, Rick?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm doing awesome, man. Hey, listen, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, certainly you're a biologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and you've got oversight responsibility for national forest and lakes across the state. I mean, like managing 1.2 million acres of wildlife habitat in some 75 public lakes. That's pretty significant. But you also, sort of your claim to fame beyond that is the Magnolia White-tailed Deer Records Program. And then beyond that, just a pure love of deer hunting, like me. I love fishing and deer hunting. Spent a lot of time up in the Mississippi Delta. But man, there's a lot to talk about. And I told you before we started the show that I wish we would have scheduled a whole show together. I think we'll have you back. There's so much to talk about. But how you doing, man?
I'm doing fine. How about you, Ricky?
I'm doing really well. So first of all, I should point out you grew up in Potts Camp, which is between New Albany and Holly Springs. That's north of Oxford. I know about it. I actually mentioned I'd never heard of Potts Camp before until we had the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund, and I mentioned something about Chairman Neil Whaley and the need for his leadership on that bill. And so I went and studied the map and said, okay, that's a beautiful area of the country. That's a great place to grow up in, wasn't it?
It was great. And we're surrounded by the Holly Springs National Forest. So I grew up hunting national forest lands, and actually just south of Potts Camp is the upper end of Sardis Reservoir. So I grew up fishing the backwaters of Sardis.
Wow. So you've caught a few crappie in your day?
I caught crappie. I caught bass. Man, I waded around in those sloughs and river runs. We call them river runs, old Oxbow lakes, and just love fishing when I was growing up, 10, 12, 13, 14 years old. Fished every chance I got.
When you look back on it, I certainly look at it this way too, so regular listeners know this, but I often say about the outdoors that it kept me out of trouble. In a way, actually, it saved me. That's what I would say. It saved me. That I would rather than gallivant, I'd rather be, going to try to catch a redfish and whatever. But do you look at it that way too?
Yeah, I do. And you know what's funny is I'm sure things have changed now with the kids now, but when I was growing up in high school, every day when we came to school, that's all the guys got together and talked about is hunting and fishing, squirrel hunting, deer hunting, fishing. And every day, that's what we talked about. And the minute we got out of school, we ran home, we grabbed a fishing rod and we went fishing, or we ran home and grabbed a gun and we went squirrel hunting. And that's what we did every day, all the time.
that is so cool. I think that a family that fishes or hunts together stays together, but there's nothing better than good outdoors to solve some of the modern problems of today, iPhones and social media and all that. Who taught you to love the outdoors?
My father. I mean, ever since I can remember, from the time I was about 5 or 6 years old, I can remember the very first squirrel hunt he took me on. I was in the first grade, had just gotten out of school, and he got off work. He came home and picked me up and carried me squirrel hunting with him. And I remember him shooting the squirrel and they're falling out of the tree just as if it were yesterday. And he took me fishing every chance he got. And just to tell you how bad I had the bug, at times when he couldn't take me, I cried like a baby. I mean, I begged him, Daddy, please take me with you. And I loved it that much. But yeah, I give all the credit to my father for getting me hooked in the outdoors.
Yeah, I had the same sort of reaction to what you were saying, that my father, he worked hard, he's working a lot, but he loved to fish. He loved to squirrel hunt. We went on annual dove hunts together. And my two grandfathers, God bless them both, they spent so much time with me in the outdoors. And look, I can. How many times did your father say to you, if you don't leave your hook in the water, you're not going to catch anything? So, I throw it out, reel it in, and throw it out and reel it in. You know the feeling, don't you?
I know the feeling. I remember it exactly. Yep.
Okay, so along the way, though, you started to really get into this whole notion of deer hunting. I mean, you actually described yourself as fanatical, but let's don't get to that point yet. Let's talk about where it started and this growing knowledge around it. Was it long before you became a biologist?
It was. So again, when I was about 10 years old, and I was just probably 8 or 9 or 10 years old, I was fascinated with my father when he would go deer hunting with his friends. And of course, they ran dogs. I would sit around and listen to the stories that they would tell as they chased deer. And they talked about these big bucks. They called them blue bucks back then. And they chased these big bucks. And I was just fascinated. And I just couldn't wait till the opportunity that I'd have the opportunity to go hunting. And just story after story. And it was just so amazing to me. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And it was in me. I just couldn't help it.
Well, things progressed. Things progressed very significantly in your life, to the point that you ultimately, I should say this, as you were sort of progressing, did you ever in your wildest imagination dream that you would actually be part of creating the Magnolia White-tailed Deer Records program?
No, I did not. But I did know that I had a love and a fascination for large white-tailed deer. And again, as I listened to the stories of my father's friends and remember seeing the big bucks, the racks from the big bucks that they killed, I was so fascinated with that. And I always wondered how big they were compared to other places. And it just went from there. I had no idea it was going to lead to Magnolia Records, but I had a fascination with large white-tailed deer.
County by county, we have some data, man. We have serious data. And one of the things that I like to say is that we're the capital of the outdoors in America. And for regular listeners, you've heard me say this 100 times, but if someone is listening for the first time, you think about the offshore fishing and the backwater fishing of coastal Mississippi, turkey hunting. That's, just about some of the best around all over this state. When you look at the Mississippi Delta and what's happening there with big bucks and great duck and deer hunting, but the great buck hunting is not just in the Mississippi Delta. It's really all across this state. You're in a great position to understand that. When you add it all up, Mississippi is really the capital of the outdoors, isn't it?
It is, no doubt. And I wanted to be able to show the rest of the country that. So just to kind of give you a quick background on that, I traveled back in the early to mid 1990s.
Mississippi.
One Mississippi. I love it. The new state song for the state of Mississippi from my friend Steve Azar. That's so awesome. Hey, we have Rick Dillard with us today. He's a biologist for the U.S. Forest Service. He's done so much. He's oversees fish and wildlife programs for the National Forest in Mississippi. He's got responsibilities across the state. He started the Magnolia White-tailed Deer Records Program, which is literally a county by county, I would say, bragging rights for the state of Mississippi. When you started, you mentioned you never dreamed that it would become what it is, but now that it's become it is significant what it is, what you're cataloging, isn't it?
It is. It's significant because initially we just started out wanting to be able to show county by county the largest bucks that had come from each county, but because we teamed up with the deer biologists, with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, they thought that this was a wonderful opportunity to capture a whole lot more data on these bucks. And so we were able to capture everything from the soil region that it came from to what type of management, whether it was private land or public land or DMAP clubs or whatever. And we were able to capture so much information. And when you put that into a computer database and you start analyzing all of that, you really start to see some neat trends start to pop out. And we still haven't scratched the surface on the amount of data that we have that we could utilize. And lastly, as well, Dr. Steve Damaris, the lead deer researcher at Mississippi State University, has also used this data to help him understand deer and large bucks and where they have come from across the state.
Hey, so Rick, when you look at the data, and like you said, we've only just begun to realize how we might be able to extrapolate the data to learn more. What stands out to you?
Well, one of the things that stands out, of course, number one is that the Mississippi Delta, as we all know, is probably the top region in the state for producing large bucks. On average, they're larger there than anywhere else in the state. But there are pockets of other areas across the state that go unknown, that people don't know about. And they're not large areas, but there's pockets within counties where more than one big buck has been killed from that we're finding out about.
So, like, where are one or two of those pockets located?
I'll just name one of them that will surprise everybody is DeSoto County in North Mississippi, just south of Memphis. DeSoto County has produced some really large bucks, despite the fact that it's probably the fastest commercial and residential area in the state, given the fast growth of South Haven and Olive Branch and Hernando. But DeSoto County has produced some really large bucks.
You know, what's interesting is, of course, we always think about coastal Mississippi not having bigger deer. And we think it's because of genetics, but what we've learned through the research of Mississippi State and others is really about generational, what the feeding that they do generationally. And so if you've got really good, whatever the nutrients might be for a particular area, if the mother has access to that and you have that over generations, you can really produce some big deer, can't you?
You can. And Magnolia Records has also showed us that, because we also capture the year in which the deer were killed. And when we go back and look at that, there's certain pockets or areas in South Mississippi that back during the 1960s and 70s produced larger than average deer than what you would see down there now. Part of it was the habitat. people raised a lot of soybeans back then, and also the herd was expanding. And so we've got records of some 160, 170, even some 180-inch bucks that have come from that part of the world 40, 50 years ago. A lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, Rick, what's interesting about if you go back and look at the 3 farms that I manage now, one of them, there's a lot of pressure around it, but it's about 1,000 acres. It's 500 in the Delta, 500 in the hills, and the people who had the deer had the land before I leased it they shot a lot. They shot a whole bunch, but in a period of about let's see, 4 or 5 years. We've been able to take what I would say the average deer, big deer, might have been in the 120s. We got 2 this year in the upper 140s. One was nearly 150. And we had a couple on camera that are much bigger than that. It's frustrating because you get them on camera and they 1/3 of them are going to be pretty residential. 1/3 of them are going to have a pretty decent range. But then another 1/3 of them, man, they may go a long way away. It's not just 1 or 2, but it's 1/3 of your herd.
That's right.
And we have a lot of farmland, so a lot of deer come to our place during agricultural times, and then they might go back, or at least 1/3 or 2/3 of them will go back to where they came from. That's frustrating, but understanding that's really important. But I think by managing doe population and being very focused on passing on deer, that's the thing that we do religiously, and putting minimums on the deer that we want to shoot. It makes a huge difference in a relatively short period of time.
It does. And again, I keep going back to Magnolia records because we were able to get some really good data out of that. Back in 1994, when Mississippi first instituted the 4-point rule, overall, the 4-point rule may not have been the best, but it got people to start thinking about passing younger deer and letting them get a little bit older. When we started charting the number of deer that were entered in Magnolia records, there was this sharp increase that started about 1995 or 1996, which coincided right after the 4-point rule. And it went up, 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 up. It had to be because of that, because it got people to start thinking, hey, I need to start passing on some of these younger deer. So it does work.
It makes a huge difference. And I don't think I've had a white-tailed deer expert from across the state who hasn't said the same thing. That what's happening, there was a long period of time, certain parts of the state, we virtually didn't see deer, and they slowly reintroduced them. And so over the years, getting to you think about 4-point rule, at one point, just passing on a deer that had any antlers was just unheard of. And slowly but surely, we've educated people, and people, private land and public land alike have really begun to understand the relationship between seeing deer, seeing big deer, and being willing to pass on deer. And those new behaviors for hunters have really taken hold, haven't they?
They have. They sure have. And it's reflected in the deer that we've received in Magnolia records.
So Rick, when you look back at this past season, the last couple of seasons, because of COVID, a lot more people out hunting. They felt safe in the outdoors. What do you see in the size of deer that we've shot across the state in the last couple of years?
Well, there was a pretty significant increase in the number of, say, 125, 130, 135-inch deer. However, what is interesting is that the 160, 170, 180-inch deer have gone down. We hit our peak back around 2010, 2011. So those really, really top-end deer, we peaked out then, and it's kind of fallen off. But we have seen an increase in the 130, 135-inch deer.
Yeah, that's interesting. You have a theory on that?
Part of it is it takes, everything has to line up just right in order to produce those top end deer. So you have to have the right conditions when the fawns are born, as you mentioned earlier with MSU's research, and then that has to correspond with having good weather, good habitat conditions for 4 or 5 years in a row, and everything has to line up, and also allowing those deer to get older, that you have a big cohort or your class of deer that come out doing that. and different things happen that just doesn't allow that to line up. And of course, when you're shooting them a really good deer that's 4 years old, that's 135, 140-inch deer, it's not going to make 170. And hard for people to pass those up, me included.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard. 150 to 160 class deer is hard to do it. And the other thing is that technology, man, camera technology has gotten so much better. So, we're able to like zero in more so than maybe we were in the past, particularly with the cellular technology. And that's made people way more efficient than probably they need to be in a lot of cases. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. And it's caused people to hold out, because I've seen situations where I've hunted several days in a row, and I swear there's not a mature deer in the area. Go back and check my card, and he's coming to at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, wow, he's here. And so you don't settle for that 110-inch 8-point, because there's something larger out there, and you keep waiting. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people. It gives them hope when you've got that type of technology.
Well, Troy Ruiz of the Primos clan. My dear friend Steve Azar, the music and cultural ambassador for the state of Mississippi, the theme song for Super Talk Outdoors, but now officially the contemporary state song for the state of Mississippi. I'm so proud of Steve, and look forward to that gaining some traction. I think it's going to create some great opportunities for us to promote the state of Mississippi, because the song is full of so much to be proud of about this great state. By the way, I really enjoyed that conversation with Rick Dillard. I can't wait to come back and have conversations with him about so much of what he loves about the outdoors. Just fun just to have conversation with people who care deeply about this place we call Mississippi. So now let's move over to my friend John Gruchy, who's the private lands program coordinator for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And he's a good friend. He's been on the show before, and I really enjoy it because he's got his finger on the pulse of what it takes to be successful from a wildlife management point of view. And he's been with the agency since 2007. John, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, doing good. Little wet, little soggy. We got several inches of rain over the weekend, but we're doing good, Mr. Riggy.
Yeah, well, look, at the beginning of the show, I said this, that I checked the weather before we started the show, and it looks like we may get a bit of a reprieve, at least on these major systems coming through this week. And we need a reprieve down here. We need some of the fresh water to get out of the salt water here in coastal Mississippi, and we need it to get calm offshore so we can get offshore and see what's going on out there. We have not been offshore yet. Literally not one time, because the weather's been just absolutely unrelenting. Same true all across the state, isn't it?
Oh, that's right, man. We've this is about the third wet spring we've had in a row. We haven't really had a drought of any measure. I mean, we had a bad drought in 15 and 16, but with just a month here and there. We were a little dry through the winter, actually. Got some fire. They had some flare-ups, I guess the Forestry Commission did with wildfires, but other than that, the weather has just been kind of soggy. A lot of turkey hunters are calling, saying, "Man, I've been washed out a bunch of days." But not much we can do about that.
Yeah, no, it is what it is. You just wait for the good times and take best advantage of it that you can at that moment. So, John, let's remind people who didn't hear us talk before what the private lands program is at the department.
Man, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm actually the statewide coordinator of the private lands program, and essentially we have a staff of trained wildlife biologists who are available at no charge to visit with individual private landowners. There's no acreage restrictions. There's no other types of restrictions. You can just go to our website at mdwfp.com/private lands and request a site visit. If you do it over the website, we do ask you to go ahead and put your map. There's an application where you can put your property map in, and that just tells us so much information. Then we can, if you just draw us a little map on there in the application we have, then we can know your soils before we get there. Of course, we can know how to get there. A lot of different things, a lot of different information. So free service. We've got, between every biologist is going to do combined, we do over 300 site visits a year, and impact over 350,000 acres every year.
That's truly incredible. One of the things that those of us who are already thinking about preparing for next year's deer season, and even if you're not preparing for next year's deer season, you're just in the process of thinking about wildlife habitat and weed control and things like this.
Sure.
It is really incredible. I obviously have farmer friends that we lease farms from, and they've had to really contend with a lot of skyrocketing prices as it relates to herbicides, as it relates to nitrogen and other fertilizers. Listen, diesel fuel. This is a very interesting time, and my costs each year for just doing food plots are a little bit more than $3,000. Well, if you apply the current, and that's before herbicides, that's just fertilizer, seeds. But if you apply the current cost increases to that, we're looking at probably $4,000 to $5,000, maybe even greater than $5,000. So I'm already beginning to think about what I can do to deal with that. Are you hearing other people thinking about that as well?
Not only are we hearing other people, as the agency, we are a large consumer of diesel fuel and seed and fertilizer. So we're dealing with it on multiple fronts. I can tell you that I just bought a herbicide. Not only is it expensive, it is hard to get. We're going to have a hard time getting glyphosate. We're going to have a hard time with availability on certain seed products. We could not get joint vetch very readily. Anything that's coming from overseas, the generic chemicals are hard to get. The branded chemicals we can get. So what I would encourage folks to do is to look at your food plot program and look at what you're doing and think, what can I do to streamline this and get the best return on investment? And, we should be thinking about that anyway. But at times when we get lean, that's when we really got to tighten things up. And so if you're a dove hunter and you've been doing a high dollar sunflower type situation, those sunflower plots, which are pretty expensive on the front end, this year they're going to be very expensive. And so you might want to think, can I go to a sorghum plot? Could I get in some millet and maybe add some diversity to that dove field and try to defray some of the costs with a different style of planting? The other thing is, if people are planting a big acreage, I would encourage you to shrink that acreage down and try to maximize your good dirt. Everybody knows where their good soil is. Maybe you've got some plots where you're planting that flood or that have really dry ground. They dry out in the summer. Let's try to focus on those good sites and really spend our money wisely.
Let me get, again, applying it to my situation, because I'm thinking about what most people who have to manage, land, particularly around deer, what must be going through their heads. But like, for example, let me tell you what we do. We plant a mixture, a 5-way mixture. It's oats, cereal, rye, and wheat, and then arrowhead clover and crimson clover. Mm-hmm. Now, in certain areas where and I can, I wish I could tell you the rhyme or reason, because I haven't done a soil test to know this for sure, but the arrowhead and the crimson clover in certain areas have done extraordinarily well. I mean, just year after year, it does extraordinarily well. I'm actually considering in those areas, because those are perennials, right? I mean, in those areas, managing to just let that come back again and not trying to go in there and rip the soil up and start off from scratch. What's your thoughts about that?
Sure. Well, that's a good policy. What those arrowleaf and crimson clover are actually reseeding annuals, even though a lot of people think they're perennials. They're so vigorously reseed that they are, they look like they function as perennials. So particularly if you make the best way you can manage that is to let those plants come to seed. Right now they're coming to seed. Crimson clover throughout all the state is pretty red flower right now. Arrowleaf clover will flower in about June. let those finish. You wait till about the 4th of July and then spray Roundup on that plot too. They're going to be finished and dead. Their seed will have made. Spray Roundup to try to kill the Johnson grass and crabgrass, any of the weeds that are coming up. And then you can bush hog that plot and let it sit until the fall and lightly scratch it. And you'd be shocked at how much, and when I say lightly scratch, I don't mean a big heavy plow or a disc. I'm talking about a farm disc, and straighten the blades out, scratch it a little bit, and you would be shocked at how much of that is going to come back natural. So just capitalizing on your reseeding annuals is another really good tactic, and that's for your fall plantings. Now I was kind of talking about summer plantings back there when I'm pounding on the dove field situation, but you mentioned another thing, soil test. People that haven't been soil testing, now this is the time when I want to make sure that I'm not putting out wasted fertilizer. And soil test, Mississippi State University is a great source of information for that. Talk to your county extension office and ask them for some soil tested envelopes. Go out and they can even give you a little guide. It's not hard to take a soil test. Go out and test those plots individually and try to see exactly how much you can put out.
So if let me ask you that too. If you look at the other three things that I mentioned, the cereal rye, the wheat, and the oats, those are heading out as well. So will those reseed as well?
Not nearly as vigorously. So that's one of the reasons there's a good industry around selling that seed year after year. They're not nearly as vigorous reseeders. They will in some level, but you could also top sow that. So if you allow on the reseeding of your crimson and arrowleaf, then you could just top sow or side dress a little bit of weed on, maybe with your fertilizer application, and try to get a little bit out of that wheat. But the seed viability, those seed, for one thing, they're pretty highly predated. Wheat and oats and cereal rye, the birds are going to eat them and stuff like that. But for another thing, once they sit above ground and get rained on and all that, we have seed issues. So seed viability.
Okay, so in that situation where we're going to let the two clovers reseed, so still go in there and hit it with some fertilizer though.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on the soil test, if you're able to soil test, I would try to soil test and see what you can, what's the best fertilizer mixture. I can guarantee you're not going to get a recommendation for nitrogen. So the people that are putting out 13, 17, you're probably just going to get a potash and phosphorus recommendation. And you're probably going to get a lime recommendation. Now, lime needs to be incorporated. We can talk about that later on, but that's probably what you're looking at.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. Boy, people are facing some really high costs, and John Gruchy is in the business. Not Gruchy is in the business. Not only is thinking about it from the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks perspective, because they buy a lot of stuff, but he's thinking about private landowners and the dilemma that so many of us are facing. So when we come back, we'll continue the conversation.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. We have John Gruchy with us. He's the Private Lands Program Coordinator for the state of Mississippi. And John, it occurs to me that we need to come back together again in the very near future. Because a lot of the questions that I have for you, I think a lot of people have right now as they're trying to wrestle with this. One of the questions I asked you when we were at break was, we're doing both nitrogen and 13-13-13 on all of our food plots. And I mean, our fertilizer costs are going to be enormous this year. And I was asking you, should we just go to 13-13-13 or just go to nitrogen as a way of just saving some costs this year? If you were us, what would you do?
Sure. Well, that's a good question, and any biologist is always going to answer every question with the statement, "It depends." It depends. So
right.
It kind of depends on what you want to do. There are a couple of different strategies here. The right answer really is to gather a soil test and try to figure out exactly what the prescription is. It's kind of like trying to bake a cake without a recipe, if you don't have a soil test. But in the absence of a soil test, what we were kind of talking about is there are some different strategies. So for folks. And really, we could do a lot with it with the spreadsheets and stuff and do the math. But there is a strategy where you could just use the cereal grain. So let's say that we can get a hold of wheat for very inexpensive. Generally, the wheat tends to be hardy. It plants on a bunch of different sites. It's fairly inexpensive in a normal year. Go with 120 pounds of wheat to the acre and fertilize it with only nitrogen. That is a strategy. that would be a way to get protein in the deer's belly, and to more than anything, a lot of people want to just get them visible. One of the big parts of deer hunting is being able to harvest the right number of does. And if you're going to get does in front of your pistol, your rifle, that's going to be a way to do that. Now, the other way would be to have a more, and probably the way most people would recommend, most biologists, is to have a diverse planting, like you've already mentioned, with 4 or 5 different things. So we have different forages that are peaking in production at different times of year. And in that case, you're really going to have to think more about root and seed growth and that kind of thing. And so you're going to need that phosphorus and potassium, which is going to come from either your triple 13, or you can buy, like I mentioned earlier, you can buy muriate of potash, or you can buy triple superphosphate. Right now, we're having a hard time getting urea, so people are having to buy ammonium nitrate, which is so much more expensive. It's just people are going to have to call ahead to the co-op. Do not show up on the day of. Call ahead and figure out what they've got and what the prices are, and then start thinking from there, and maybe put the pencil to the paper.
Well, I mean, it's a good, I like the thought of this. If we've got some food plots where we've had really good and vigorous growth of clover.
Sure.
Do what you said. Go in there and put a weed killer out, go in there and cut it, and then lightly scratch the surface, and then let it start to grow. And then we can always come in there, because the thing about wheat is it's so forgiving. I mean, you can go in there and scatter it all over the place. You don't really have to do much. You don't have to go in there and mess up the growth of the clover. Just go in there and supplement it, and it will probably grow just fine. And you're probably going to be pretty good in that situation, aren't you?
And we've had plots that have reseeded for 20 years without ever adding seed. Crimson especially is a vigorous reseeder, but arrowleaf as well. And we get really good production when we get rain. If they have good soil fertility, good pH, really good production out of those clovers.
Well, that gives me some strategy to think about as we approach this. We do about 40 food plots across the 3 farms, so it adds up pretty quickly, the cost.
That's right.
As you think about people doing summer food plots, what you thinking on that?
Sure, man. In terms of just in general function and physiology, nutrition and physiology of white-tailed deer, summer nutrition is very important, and that's why we push so much prescribed burning and summer plantings. Most of the folks know that if they've got any experience, soybean is a very highly prized deer forage. And the reason for that is it's high in production, it's very palatable. And so when we're selecting forages, we try to think about what you have available to you in terms of your size of the planting, the soil fertility, and that kind of thing. And if your summer forage is fit for you, it may be a situation where you don't have large plots. If you plant a summer forage, it's going to get browsed out. So it just depends on what the goals and objectives of the landowner are and what you have available to you for your management.
Hey, we talked a little bit about this offline, and we don't have time to go into great detail, but we have one of our farms is part of it's in the hills, part of it's in the Delta. The hills, there's a real problem with kudzu, and it's growing like crazy. Do you guys, I could call the department, and there are people available to sort of advise us on how to approach that?
Absolutely. So any non-native species, kudzu, kogan grass, Japanese climbing fern, there's a slew of them. We are very experienced in all that, and we can make herbicide recommendations. There's also a potential to get cost share from USDA, NRCS, to be able to offset some of the costs for spraying herbicides. But in general with kudzu, we're using, depending on whether it's in pine or hardwood, we're going to use a chemical called Escort or a chemical called Milestone.
Well, look, we're going to talk more about that, because I think I'm going to inquire about getting some help with that. It's just spreading like wildfire, and it's taking over some of our more cherished areas. And we'll spend more time on the next time you and I visit to talk more about that as well. But anyway, this has been John Gruchy. He's the Private Lands Program Coordinator for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Have a great day, man. I appreciate you joining us.
Appreciate it, Ricky. Thank you.
Have a great day, and as usual, stay safe when you're in the outdoors. We'll see you next week.